The 1980s was a great decade. I know, because that's where I come from. Okay, I may have been a baby, but through the magic of movies and TV, we can assume there was big hair, big weekday parades in big cities, and John Hughes was pretty much behind all of it. There were also a lot of coasters that opened in the 1980s. This was before B&M split off on their own, before Intamin was the innovator we know today. There were no LIMs or LSMs, no RMC or Gerstlauer, but there were some great coasters that made a splash at the time, and some of them are still amazing to this day. Now, let's spice this up with some 80s music. Definitely not my favorite era of music, but it was not hard to find a bunch of great ones. So today, let's count down my 15 favorite 80s songs, with the 15 best coasters of the decade. I'm gonna try to play a couple seconds of each song, which shouldn't be a problem, but in case I get a manual copyright claim, I may need to cut out that part of the video later on. So if you notice something missing or an obvious gap, check out the pinned comment below and I'll point out what I had to cut out. Also note, there were some very good coasters relocated in the 80s, like Phoenix Econobles, but unless they originally opened in the 80s, I don't consider that an 80s coaster. I also want to thank Disapatch Productions for this very different video idea. Number 15, Celebration by Kool and the Gang, 1980. And Ultra Twister at various parks, 1985 to 1989. This looked like it may have been Togo's best model, and you can still ride this in Japan. There was one in America that operated for 20 seasons, but if you're like me and missed your chance after 2005, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for both of us. I really want to ride this, and I have no idea when I'll go to Japan. In the 80s, 4 of these made their debut: Tokyo Dome City, World Food Festival, Nagashima Spaland, and here in the US, Six Flags Great Adventure. This is a linear coaster with no turns, but it starts with a vertical lift, an 85-degree drop, a heartline roll, a switch track so you turn backward, and then 2 more heartline rolls in reverse. It's one of the more unique coaster experiences that you can get, and there's still 4 of them in Japan, so you may have some time. Number 14, You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC, 1980, and Bandit at Yomiuri in Japan, 1988. When this toga opened, it was groundbreaking. It was the world's fastest coaster at 68.4 miles per hour, and even though its official height was only 167 feet, because it was built on a hill, the actual change in elevation is almost 256 feet. With almost a mile of track featuring no inversions, just hills, turns, and a helix, it was one of the first hyper layouts ever built. This led to bigger coasters built by Togo in the 90s, and it operates to this day as a coaster legend. Number 13, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds, 1985. And Wiener Looping at Wiener Prater in Austria, 1982. This Schwarzkopf portable shuttle loop has a very weird layout, something you would make in Roller Coaster Tycoon just because it looks cool, but this is a standout ride. It starts with a reverse tire launch, up the first spike, then back through the station, picks up more speed as it wraps around the station, dives into a loop that circles the station, then up the other spike and you do the whole thing backwards. It apparently never opened to the public at Wiener Prater because of noise, so it was moved to Florida's Boardwalk and Baseball in 1985, spent some time at the UK's Flamingo Land, and it's currently operating at Selva Magica in Guadalajara, Mexico. Number 12, Jump by Van Halen, 1984, and Excalibur at Valleyfair, 1989. One of Arrow's weirdest models was this mine train on steroids. They only built a few of them, the most popular one being Gemini, but Excalibur is still operating up there in Minnesota, and it's a good one. I thought I would have liked it more, but for what it is, it gives a good out-of-control ride that throws in a good moment of airtime, and it feels about as janky as it looks. It's one of those coasters that's always rumored to be removed, being separated from the rest of the park and sitting in a flood zone, but as of 2022, it's still there. Number 11, Jack and Diane by John Mellencamp, 1982, and Space Mountain at Tokyo Disneyland, 1983. When Japan got their first Disney park in 1983, they, of course, had to get their own version of the Disney Classic. Standing 100 feet tall, covering 3,450 feet of track, all indoors, winding around itself in the dark, zooming past the stars and going way slower than you think you are, which is all part of the ride's charm. Space Mountain is a timeless favorite, and this was the only one that was built in the 1980s. Number 10, 8675309, Jenny by Tommy Tutum, 1981, and Viper at Six Flags Darien Lake, 1982. Just 2 years after Carolina Cyclone opened as the first coaster with 4 inversions, Darien Lake shattered that record with 5. This was Viper, standing 121 feet tall with a 71-foot drop, covering 3,100 feet of track, starting with a loop, a batwing, and a double corkscrew. Of all the aero loopers out there, this one seems to be one of the most loved, and based on my one ride, I can see why. It has a good layout and it still ran pretty smooth. Still a star 40 years later at Darien Lake. Number 9. Crazy Little Thing Called Love by Queen, 1980, and Vortex at Kings Island, 1987. Speaking of inversion record breakers, Vortex took down Viper's record 5 years later, this one adding one extra loop and being the first one to reach 6. This was also a lot bigger, standing 148 feet, dropping down 138 feet, hitting 55 miles per hour and covering 3,800 feet of track. This was a beautiful coaster with a good layout, starting with an airtime-filled straight first drop and a big sweeping turnaround before the inversion started, and ending with a helix. Vortex may have outstayed its welcome, as it lost popularity and got pretty rough, but it got a big outpouring of love when it was announced that it would be giving its final rides in 2019. Number 8. Livin' on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, 1986, and Dragon Mountain at Marineland, 1983. This one is on my bucket list. One of the weirdest coasters ever built, sometimes described as a steel version of the Beast. It's just a long meandering ride on a mountain, secluded from everything else, rising up 186 feet on the terrain, covering 5,500 feet of track and going through 4 inversions. I don't even care if the ride is good. It looks like a wild experience regardless. Number 7. You Give Love a Bad Name by Bon Jovi, 1986, and Big Thunder Mountain at Magic Kingdom, 1980, and Tokyo Disneyland, 1987. Just like Space Mountain, it just isn't a Disney trip without a ride on Big Thunder Mountain. Disneyland got the first one in 1979, and Magic Kingdom was close to follow, with 3 lift hills, indoor and outdoor sections, going in and out of the mountain. This is a very long ride and a very intense ride for a family coaster. It picks up momentum and feels out of control, some of that 80s jankiness adding to it. It's a top-tier Disney coaster, and it deserves to be named one of the best of the 80s. Number 6. Under Pressure by David Bowie and Queen, 1981, and Moonsault Scramble at Fuji-Q Highland in Japan, 1983. Fuji-Q Highland is a park known for its innovation, and this Misho Amusement Machines monster was groundbreaking. It was the first coaster to exceed 200 feet, although it doesn't get credit for it because it's a shuttle coaster. Depending where you were on the train, you may or may not hit that 200-foot mark. After it lifted you up the spike, it would drop you into a pretzel knot, a very intense inversion before heading up another big spike, and doing it all backward. It was an early version of a boomerang, coming out the year before the first Vekoma boomerang, but this one-of-a-kind coaster only lasted until 2000. Number 5. Just Like Heaven by The Cure, 1987, and American Eagle at Six Flags Great America, 1981. The first major Intamin coaster just celebrated its 40th anniversary, buried way in the back of the park, having to hike a mile off the main path just to get there, but it's worth it. Standing 127 feet tall, but with a 147-foot drop, this hit 66 miles per hour, and it was the tallest and fastest wooden coaster at the time. It has 2 tracks going out and back, a giant elevated helix being the far point in the layout, with some very solid airtime hills going and coming back, covering a total of 4,650 feet of track. Even with some of its rough points, this is still a beloved wooden coaster. Number 4. Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, 1987, and Big Bad Wolf at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, 1984. It's hard to find a more loved defunct coaster than Big Bad Wolf, lasting 25 years before the park determined it was at the end of its service life. They removed it in 2009. This started with a ride through a Bavarian village. Then it stopped, climbed the tallest lift at 100 feet, turned left, and dived down 80 feet straight into the river, only to turn at the last moment, the aero-suspended train swinging out and twisting back to the station. At 2,800 feet, this was not the longest ride, but it was a great one. Number 3. Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, 1985, and The Bat at Kings Island, 1981. Before there was Big Bad Wolf, there was the Bat, the one that started the entire aero-suspended genre. It was revolutionary to hang a train under the track, and Aero had a lot of bugs to work out. It only stood 100 feet and hit 34 miles per hour, but the track wasn't banked, so the train swung out way too much, putting more stress on the track than it could handle, and the ride was plagued with problems. It lasted parts of 3 seasons before closing, Aero going back to the drawing board to fix the bugs. But for those who got to ride it, those bugs made for one insane ride. Number 2. Runnin' Down a Dream by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, 1989, and Mindbender at Galaxyland Amusement Park in Canada, 1985. This Schwarzkopf classic was almost done before it even got started. About 6 months after it opened, the back car derailed and killed 3 of its passengers. The trains were redesigned, and it was able to reopen about 6 months later, and it's been alright ever since. At 145 feet tall, it's one of the tallest indoor coasters in the world, and it covers over 4,000 feet, wrapping through the rafters, under and around footpaths. It's just a whirlwind of drops and loops, and apparently it's very intense. It's been down for almost a year and a half now, apparently waiting for replacement parts. So hopefully, this can reopen and continue to be one of the best coasters in Canada. Number 1. Against the Wind by Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, 1980, and Magnum XL200 at Cedar Point, 1989. Magnum was a big deal when it opened, being the first full-circuit coaster to stand over 200 feet. Its drop is only 195 feet, so is it really a hyper? Yes and no. No, because the drop isn't 200 feet, but yes, because Cedar Point invented the term just for Magnum. It's a wild, L-shaped layout full of airtime, a very weird turnaround element, 3 tunnels, and for my money, the best finale on any coaster, a string of airtime hills that throws you out of your seat. This is still in my overall top 15, the only coaster that was built in the 80s that's even in my top 100. So this is a rare beast that stands the test of time, and it's my number 2 coaster at Cedar Point despite very strong competition. That's all for my top 15 songs and top 15 coasters of the 1980s. I only got to write some of these, so I did my best to rank the ones I haven't been on. So if you have any insight to add, sound off in the comments below. Before you go, don't forget to drop a like, and if you're new here and love ranking coasters, please give me a sub. Also, check out my links below for my Discord server, and my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you love baseball like I do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.